from my my monitoring source that they cleaned up the live stream. I apologize. I don't know what to do with this. I'm live, and that this is some of the things that you deal with when you're live, and you're your own technical director, you're your own producer, your own content creator. It is a uh, you can try it. It may not work. You can try it again. It may not work. You can try it again, and it will work. So it's a trial and error type of scenario, and I apologize. I hope that this really took care of the situation. This is the first time I've used a platform that wasn't software related. So this is all hardware that I have in place for this live stream. And again, hopefully I can stay stable. But we were talking about the rabies, and I saw an interesting article about a patient who came down with rabies, which is a very rare situation because of an organ transplant. So somehow the rabies virus was suppressed and was not detected when tests were conducted. But when the organ was transplanted, the dormant virus, being the rabies virus, activated itself. The gentleman caught rabies and he subsequently died. Let's take a look at the video clip.
The CDC says a Michigan man died last December after receiving a kidney transplant from a donor who had undiagnosed rabies. 5 weeks after the procedure at an Ohio hospital, the man experienced tremors, confusion, and other side effects and was readmitted. He died a few days later. An autopsy determined he died from a rabies infection passed to him by his kidney donor. The donor was believed to have died from cardiac arrest, but it turns out he had been scratched by a skunk a few weeks before his death and was likely misdiagnosed. The CDC says the risk for transplant-transmitted infection still remains low.
Okay, so that's very interesting. That's very interesting. The donor was infected by a skunk. Skunks are a host for rabies, so I tell those individuals that are wilderness enthusiasts to be aware of skunks, raccoons, and squirrels as well, because they do serve as hosts for rabies. I did do some follow-up research, and it appears that the skunk may have been, the skunk may have been infected by a bat. Bat are also hosts for rabies, and a simple scratch from the animal to the donor, because it was a scratch, it did not manifest itself as quickly. So scratches and things like that, they incubate in the body at a slower rate than a bite, because rabies lives in the saliva of animals, of mammals, lives in the saliva. But if it's a scratch, then it takes a while for that infection to manifest itself within the body, which is a delayed interaction. So that's probably what happened, and probably why it was not detected from the donor. Unfortunate case, very unfortunate case for that. But if you don't have an understanding of how devastating rabies is, check out this this clip.
Rabies is one of the most terrifying diseases known to humans. And if the symptoms develop, you need medical attention or you're going to die.
In 1955, this man was attacked by a rabid wolf. The medical team at the Pasteur Institute in Iran filmed the progression of his disease.
This man developed symptoms of rabies.
They
He
receive
displays a characteristic restlessness and agitation.
hydrophobia, fear of water.
As
Which
a precaution against the
I'm still trying
convulsions
to
which
wrap my
commonly
mind
occur
over
in
that.
rabies, the patient is secured hand and foot. The most familiar clinical symptom of rabies is associated with difficulty in swallowing. When fluid comes in contact with the throat, it is violently
Frothing, foaming
expelled,
at the mouth.
at the same time producing painful,
Horrible.
spasmodic muscular contractions.
The medical team could do nothing but document this man's rabies. Within 5 days, he was dead.
The problem with rabies is that, unlike most diseases which Mother Nature is merciful, in which you lapse into coma or obtunded, with rabies, as you're dying, you are intermittently fully coherent, and you can fully express verbally to your family how scared you are, how awful it is, and how you know you're going to die. So for that reason, it's really, really feared.
Horrible.
The thing about rabies is that it affects the nervous system. So it affects the brain, the spinal cord, the thinking parts of a mammal. And it doesn't just randomly wreck those thinking parts, it changes them in a specific way to help the virus succeed.
Wow.
Western medicine has made a lot of progress in fighting rabies. In fact, if you get rabies from an animal, there will be several weeks before you get symptoms, and there's still time in there for medicine to work.
Delayed
Once
response.
those symptoms develop, that virus has made its way into your brain. And at that point, medicine may not be able to help you at all.
Correct. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it right there. Rabies is an absolutely horrible disease. And again, the reason why I wanted to address this is because this case that's relatively new, the end of 2024, 2025, it's a very new case. And you know, most of us, if we have a medical situation and we have to go in for a blood transfusion or receive an organ, we, in good faith, we expect, you know, to have healthy organs, healthy blood. In good faith, we expect that. This is a very rare case, but as you can see, it's still something to be aware of. One more thing that I want to touch on because of this particular case. Typically, when I hear about these cases, I go into the archives of my brain, and I think about what triggers me, what can I relate to this particular type of situation. Now, of course, you know, I grew up in a rural South. I grew up in the country. At any time, you know, I could have, you know, come down with something with, you know, the wildlife because growing up as a kid, we're out there, you know, with wildlife, squirrels. I watched my dad kill squirrels with his BB gun and skin them and eat them. So I grew up around wildlife. My understanding is, you know, rabies in itself is predominantly on the eastern side of the U.S., not so on the west. So it's not a big thing on the west coast, but it is a big thing on the east coast. However, I saw as a kid growing up, I saw I was inspired by a movie that I saw in 1976 named The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. Now, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble was starred very young John Travolta. And when I read this rabies case, it automatically triggered this case of David Vetter. David Vetter, who was a young, who was born with an immune compromised body. His body could not fight any type of disease or virus. So that's why when I saw that article, it snapped to me of the case of David Vetter. David Vedder was born with a rare disease called SCIDS, and well, the acronym is SCIDS. But I'm gonna show you a video of the David Vedder documentary, and it's not related to rabies, but it is related to how the body responds to viruses and pathogens that enter the body. And with rabies, your body will fight it, but it can't fight it. Rabies will overcome the body, but in David Vedder's case, even if you sneeze, a cold could wipe him out. So let's take a look at David Vedder's case. Let's cue it up here.
We have a story tonight about a little boy in Houston, Texas, and the unfortunate life disease has brought him.
He is known only as Baby David.
In the early 1970s, an unusual boy captivated the nation.
He cannot leave his plastic bubble. Since birth, David has never touched another human being.
The case provoked an ethical catch-22.
What about the day he says, I want out of here, and you can't let him out?
And eventually turned a little boy's tragedy into a cultural touchstone.
What would happen if I left now?
But decades later, David's story is not over. Instead, it continues to resonate and unfold in remarkable ways.
The story of David had a beginning, had a middle, but there is really no end, and that is because of David's legacy.
Now I'm going to pause it for a second here. This story was so inspirational to me as a kid growing up. I was born in '69. This show came out in '76 with John Travolta being the star. However, David was born in '71. So I'm actually 2 years, maybe a year and a half older than David. So this is very relevant to my time period. And watching the movie was for a young child growing up the way I grew up, seeing this this character played by John Travolta basically live in isolation, which was a plastic housing area that had its own artificial air filter system. There could be no outside introduction of anything that wasn't sterilized, because even the smallest fraction of bacteria or germs could kill him. So he lived in a 100% complete sterile environment. And I remember watching the movie, and there was, and I'll pick up the documentary in a second. But I remember in the movie how I'm watching the John Travolta character walk out with a suit on that looked like a spacesuit. So actually seeing that actually inspired me to focus on the stars. So, well, this is space age technology that enabled David to come out of that bubble and walk around for a semi-normal type of reactive life, even though he was still in the suit. But he could walk outside that bubble and interact with the public, and I think he did that. So this movie was an inspiration for me, for not only on a scientific level, but also on a health level, and a story of inspiration all the way around. So it was a wonderful movie. So if you have never seen it before, there have been a couple other movies in the modern times, but the 1976 movie with John Travolta is the most compelling. Let's back up where we left off.
David was born September 21st, 1971. I heard the first sounds of life, and he was placed in an isolator in a bubble that was a few feet from me. We thought that the immune system was just slow to develop. There was never any plan to keep David in there, in the bubble, indefinitely.
The sterile bubble was the brainchild of doctors who feared the worst: severe combined immunodeficiency, a rare genetic defect that had taken the life of David's brother the year before. But it fell short of a cure.
It was a gradual realization that his immune system was not going to spontaneously function. So I trusted science would find an answer for us next year, then the next year.
This 3-year-old boy you see in that picture has spent his entire life in a plastic bubble.
To expose him to the air would be to kill him.
His food, clothes, and toys have to be sterilized and placed inside the bubble with sterile rubber gloves.
As the years passed with no solution,
Since his birth 6 years ago, David has lived in a plastic world.
America tuned in to watch the milestones of his curious life unfold.
The scientists who sent men to the moon have achieved another first. They have found a way to open up the world of a small Houston boy who has spent his life inside a sterile bubble.
That he was excited by his newfound freedom is obvious from the NASA film. David wanted to do everything.
I think the best portrayal of his reaction is when he held up his hands, the fascination of seeing his hands in the small gloves for the first time.
Now it is possible for him to play catch with his sister and dream of even more.
He's actually being a little bit.
The nightly news was just the start. Soon, his story took on a life of its own.
John Travolta is the boy in the plastic bubble.
David was unique, and people pay attention to things that are unique. When he was about 9 years old, he looked at me and he said, "Well, I'm a star. I don't have to clean my bubble." And I thought he meant like a star in heaven. And I said, "Oh, yes, you are, because you light up my life." And he said, "Well, not that kind of star. I'm famous."
But David's predicament brought him more than fame.
Certain things would filter back about the ethics involved in keeping a boy in this germ-free environment.
What about the day he says, "I want out of here"?
Fox Live podcast.
Okay, I'm going to cut it right here. Basically, in the John Travolta segment of this movie, he's an adult or a teen around 18 years old. He decides to leave the bubble, but in reality, what happened was David was 12 years old. He received a bone marrow transplant from his sister, and he subsequently died because there was a dormant virus that was undetectable in the bone marrow transfer to him, and when it was dormant, and after the bone marrow transplant, several months later, it activated, and it formed a form of cancer in his body, and subsequently he had a heart attack and expired. So it worked briefly, and again, this was a long time ago. This was during a time where the research was still new. Nowadays, it's almost a non-issue. We've perfected the technique of bone marrow transplant, so this is something that we can do in the medical field. But in the